I've been shooting with Fujifilm cameras for over 10 years, and in that time I've used quite a few. I switched to Fujifilm because I enjoyed the way their cameras felt to use, I loved the colors, and honestly I just really enjoyed taking pictures with them. But recently I wanted to try something different, so I reached out to Fujifilm Canada to see if there was an opportunity to get my hands on one of their cameras, actually spend some time shooting with it and make some content around my experience. And somehow we ended up here. This is the GFX100S Mark II, a 102 megapixel medium format camera, and yes, 102 megapixels. Now, if you're wondering what something like this costs, I don't blame you. The GFX100S Mark II is around 6,500 Canadian dollars just for the body alone, and the lens I was using was the GF45mm f2.8, which cost around another 2,500 Canadian dollars. So we are talking about roughly 8,500 Canadian dollars before tax. That's a lot of money for a camera, and that actually made me quite curious about this camera, because when you spend this kind of money on a camera, you have to ask, what am I actually getting for all that money? Is it really different from the cameras most of us are already using? And more importantly, is it worth it? So I've spent some time shooting with the GFX100S Mark II, and in this video I want to talk about some of the things that I've noticed. Nothing too technical. I'm not going to throw a bunch of jargon at you. I just want to talk about what it's actually like to use this camera, what surprised me, what I loved, what I didn't love, and who I think this camera actually makes sense for. The first thing I noticed about the GFX100S Mark II is that this is a big camera. Not ridiculously big, but coming from something like my X-T4, you definitely notice the difference. And what's interesting is that once you actually start using it, it doesn't feel like a massive camera. The body is actually pretty manageable. The bigger difference comes when you put a lens on it, and this is where you start realizing that you're carrying around a serious piece of equipment. But at the same time, I really like the way this camera feels. It feels solid. It feels like something that was built to be used. And because I've been using Fujifilm cameras for so long, there was also a familiarity to it. The menus, the controls, the general shooting experience. I didn't feel like I had to completely relearn to use a camera. And that's important, because when you're trying to create, the last thing you want to be doing is fighting with your camera. You just want to think about the picture. And after spending some time with this camera, I stopped thinking about the fact that I was using a medium format camera. It just became my camera. Now, let's talk about the obvious thing, 102 megapixels. Because when you hear that number, it's easy to think, okay, that's great, but what exactly does it mean? Basically, you get a ridiculous amount of detail. And I don't mean that in a way where you look at a photo on Instagram and immediately think, wow, that's 102 megapixels. You're probably not going to notice that. But where you really notice it is when you start cropping. For example, I can take a picture like this and then crop into a tiny part of the image, and there's still the ridiculous amount of detail left. And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about shooting with this camera. It gives you a lot of room to work with your photos. Maybe you took a landscape and there's a person somewhere in the frame. Maybe you were shooting a portrait and you want to reframe it, or maybe you just weren't able to get as close as you wanted. You have a lot of image to work with. And for someone like me who shoots both photography and video, I really appreciate having that flexibility. But honestly, the thing I found more interesting wasn't even the 102 megapixels. It was the way some of the images looked. And this is where things get really difficult to explain, because you can talk about sensor size, dynamic range and all of that, but sometimes you just look at an image and think, yeah, I like that. There's something about the way this camera renders an image. The transitions between lights and shadow feel really nice. Skin tones look great. There's a lot of information in the files, and when you start editing them, you have a lot of flexibility. You can push the image quite a bit without it falling apart immediately, and that's one of the things that makes this camera interesting. It's not necessarily that every single photo you take suddenly becomes 10 times better. It doesn't work like that. Your composition still matters, your lighting still matters, your lens still matters, and unfortunately the camera cannot fix bad photography. I've tested that extensively. But when everything comes together, this camera gives you a really beautiful file to work with. One thing I wanted to figure out with this camera was, would I enjoy shooting with it? Because specs are one thing, but if a camera isn't enjoyable to use, I'm probably not going to reach for it. And surprisingly, I really enjoyed shooting with this camera. I've used it for different types of photography, portraits, landscapes, street photography, just walking around and taking pictures, and it never really felt like I was carrying something that was getting in the way. There were obviously moments where I noticed the size and weight, especially if you're carrying it around for hours, but for the kind of photography where you're intentionally going somewhere to create, I didn't find it to be a problem. And I actually think that's one of the biggest differences between a camera like this and a smaller camera. This feels more like something I would take when I'm going out specifically to photograph. It's not necessarily the camera I would throw in a bag and forget about. But when I'm going somewhere and I know I want to make photographs, I really like taking this camera with me. Now obviously I'm not just a photographer, I also make a lot of videos, so I had to see what this camera could do on the video side, and this is where my feelings are a little more complicated. The GFX100S Mark II can absolutely produce beautiful video, and when you pair the larger sensor with good lighting and a good lens, you can get some really beautiful images. But I wouldn't buy this camera primarily because I want a video camera. For me, this camera makes sense as a photography first camera that happens to be capable of making really good video, and that's an important distinction because there are cameras that are designed around being video first. This, however, doesn't feel like one of them. But the kind of content I make though, having both photography and video capabilities is really useful, especially when I'm creating content around the camera itself. Now let's talk about some of the things that aren't necessarily as exciting, because 102 megapixels sound amazing until you start looking at your storage. These files are big, like really big, and if you're someone who takes hundreds or thousands of photographs on a shoot, you're going to notice that. You're going to need storage, you're going to need a computer that can handle the files comfortably, and you're going to spend more time thinking about your workflow. For me, this wasn't necessarily a deal breaker. I'm already used to working with large files and editing photos and videos. But it's something you should think about before buying a camera like this, because the camera is only one part of the equation. You have to think about the lenses, the storage, the computer, the editing software, and obviously the money. So after spending all this time with the GFX100S Mark II, is it worth it? Honestly, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're someone who just needs a camera that takes great pictures, you absolutely do not need this camera. There are so many cameras that can produce incredible images for significantly less money. And if you're a beginner, please don't go and spend $8,500 on a camera because a guy on YouTube told you it was amazing. I'm talking about me. Please don't do that. But if you're someone who really cares about photography, someone who wants incredibly detailed files, someone who prints their work, someone who crops heavily, someone who wants the flexibility that comes with a huge sensor and huge files, then I think the GFX100S Mark II starts to become more interesting. And for professionals who are making money from their photography, the equation is obviously different again. At this point, you're not just asking how much does this camera cost, you're asking, can this camera help me create better work? And that's a much more interesting question. After using Fujifilm cameras for more than 10 years, I didn't expect this camera to make me rethink what I wanted from a camera, but it kind of did. The GFX100S Mark II isn't perfect. It's expensive, the files are huge, the lenses aren't cheap, and there are definitely situations where I would rather have a smaller, lighter camera. But when I go through some of the images I've made with this camera, I understand why people get excited about medium format. It's not just about saying I have a 102 megapixel camera. It's about having a tool that gives you a ridiculous amount of information to work with and then seeing what you can create with it. And honestly, that's probably the biggest thing I've taken away from the GFX100S Mark II. The camera doesn't make you a better photographer, but when you already know what you want to create, having this much to work with can be pretty incredible. So would I buy one? Let's just say I'll probably have to start making a lot more YouTube videos. If you enjoyed this video, let me know what you think in the comments. Are you going to get this camera? Are you thinking of getting a Fujifilm camera? And let me know what camera you'd like me to test next. Maybe I'll reach out to Fujifilm Canada again and hopefully they'll send me another one of their cameras. And if you're interested in more photography, filmmaking, camera, tech content, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.